Hi, everyone. My name's Dan Benna, and thanks so much for allowing me the time to tell you about something that I developed over many years of being mentored and mentoring, and it's called the 5H Ladder for Purpose-Based Leadership. To set the context, I wanted to talk a little bit about what COVID has done, and we all know acutely the impacts of COVID. It has hit so many of us personally. It has hit our businesses. Um, It has, if nothing else, amplified an already VUCA world. And what do we mean by VUCA? It's an acronym for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And the reference on the right side of the screen here is from the Harvard Business Review, and it explains some of the elements of those four categories: the characteristics of complexity, the characteristics of volatility, of ambiguity, and of uncertainty. I think few, if any, would disagree that if the world weren't already VUCA, COVID has certainly amplified that and exacerbated those elements. So given that we all, as a global family in society, live in a VUCA world, what is a tool that you can use, that we can use, no matter what the topic is, to lead, to be seen as leaders, and to be authentic leaders in an increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world? Well, the tool that I'd like to share today is a ladder. And you knew that this was called the 5H ladder for purposeful leadership. And when you look at a ladder and when you deconstruct it, um, it's interesting because it really is a series of H's stacked upon themselves. And that's what gave me the idea for the 5H ladder for purpose-based leadership. The first H is head, the second is heart, the third is hands, the fourth is humility, and the fifth is humanity. So head, heart, hands, humility, and humanity. In a nutshell, those are the 5H's in the 5H ladder for purpose-based leadership. What do we mean by each of those? The model works equally well for people as individual leaders and for companies as private sector leaders. For people, the concepts are pretty simple. The implementation is very difficult. And in fact, I would argue that implementation of those 5H's as a person takes a lifetime to master, if you are lucky enough to master them at all. For the first H, head, what I mean is intellect and imagination, and it's a combination of the two. And you'll see as we go through this that I chose some quotes that were illustrative from leaders in different areas in different ways. And this one is from Albert Einstein. He says, imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we know and understand. That's intellect, right? Imagination embraces the entire world and all there ever will be to know and understand. So success, either as an individual or as a corporation, as a company, as an entrepreneur, as a social enterprise, success in part depends on striking the right balance between that intellect and that imagination. The second H is heart, which is really compassion. And for that quote, I chose Mother Teresa. The fruit of love is service, which is compassion in action. You've heard of service-based leadership. She was the exemplar of service-based leadership. What's more important is the whole, the sum of the parts, as opposed to any individual part. And increasingly, data show that empathetic leaders, those leaders with a high EQ, an emotional quotient, right, akin to the IQ, which is the intelligence quotient, leaders with a high EQ, those that show heart and compassion, are seen as effective, successful leaders over time. The third H is more intuitive, hands, right? It's about work. And the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was quoted as saying, if a man, or today a woman, is called a street sweeper, he or she should sweep streets even as Michelangelo painted, or as Beethoven composed music, or as Shakespeare wrote poetry. In short, be the best of anything that you can be. If you're a cashier making minimum wage in a retail store, be the best cashier that you can be. If you're the head of state, if you're an educator, if you're a private sector leader, be the best that you can be. And you do that by doing the work. It's not all about strategy. It's not all about thinking. It's not all about the other H's, because combined they're important, but individually they're not enough. Just as hands doing the work is not enough, but it's a really important component of successful overall leadership. The fourth H, humility. Socrates, the famous philosopher, is credited with a quote, "True knowledge exists in knowing that you know nothing." And as someone who is a scientist at heart, someone who has degrees in biochemistry and pharmacy, I can tell you that this is really important to understand, because as soon as you think you understand something as a scientist, that can change within the next minute or the next hour or the next day or the next month. True leaders understand that knowledge is fleeting. Knowledge is a snapshot, and you need to be adaptable and adaptive to be able to change as knowledge changes. And then the fifth is humanity, and I define that as having a social conscience. And for that quote, I use His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who says that the planet doesn't need more successful people. And in this context, he defines success traditionally: the size of your car, the size of your house, the amount of your bank account. He says the planet desperately needs more peacemakers, more healers, more restorers, storytellers, and lovers of all kinds. Humanity is critically important for successful leadership, whether that humanity is shown as an individual or as a collective called a company or a corporation or a business. For companies, the model provides a robust framework for authentic corporate purpose. There's a tremendous value to being trusted, whether you're an individual or whether you're a company or a brand. And how do you get that authenticity? Well, you start with a strong foundation of what's called ESG reporting, environmental, social, and governance metrics. And ESG in the past couple of years has exploded in terms of visibility and importance and recognition of that importance across sectors. So you start with a really strong foundation of proof points of those metrics and analytics. And then the first H, head, might manifest as science-based goals for the company, data-driven decisions, being innovative, being disruptive, having a comprehensive strategy and thoughtful governance, right? The G in ESG, ultimately having capable people. The second H, hands, doing the right work, performance culture, having demonstrated impact, again, linking back to that foundation of metrics and reporting. And then measurable results and actions that support the strategy toward resilience. Ultimately, it's about empowered people. And then the third H, heart, empathy. Just as hands was doing the right work, heart is doing the work right with strong values, a high EQ, as I mentioned, an emotional quotient, having compassionate programs, having a culture that builds and fosters and cultivates trust. Really, it's about engaged people. So with those three H's, we have capable, empowered, and engaged people. Then we add the fourth H, humility, and that's about collaborative partnerships. It's about collective impact. It's about having others praise your work more than you praise it yourself, and certainly about embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. That ultimately comes down to inspiring people by leading by example. So we have capable, empowered, engaged, and we're also inspiring people through our own example. And then the fifth H, humanity, that's about brands taking stands, advocacy, putting your money where your mouth is and using that mouth to have vocal positions on solutions to societal problems. And you manifest that through social investment and philanthropy and CSR and doing things like supporting the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And that's ultimately about inspired people. So we have capable, empowered, and engaged people. We are inspiring them by example, and ultimately they become inspired. And they then are ambassadors and loyal followers of the values-based, purpose-based leadership that our company hopefully exhibits. And all of that wrapped together forms, in my view, the definition of purpose. So that's why it's called the 5H ladder for purpose-based leadership. And when a company thoughtfully and collaboratively identifies that purpose and then implements it comprehensively, and then demonstrates and measures its impacts precisely and transparently, and then communicates it authentically through authentic, trust-based storytelling, the value is immeasurable. It is multifold. And just to give you one example of how deep and broad that value is, this is a study last year by Porter Novelli. It's called the Executive Purpose Study. And you can see, I mean, it's remarkable the value that is had when purpose is done authentically, legitimately, and comprehensively. Reputational benefit, employee recruitment and retention, increased consumer trust, customer loyalty, likelihood to recommend a brand or a company, likelihood to purchase, differentiation from peers, yes, improved financial performance on many levels, and strengthened license to operate. A remarkably broad and deep value if you get purpose right. So my ending question to you is, knowing what purpose is, knowing the 5 H's of head, heart, hands, humility, and humanity, what's your purpose as an individual and as a company? If you'd like to talk more about how you can apply the 5H ladder for purpose-based leadership to drive value for you and your business and all of your stakeholders, I'd be happy to chat. This is a little bit about me. You can learn more at danbena.com. And I wanted to give credit to the inspiration for the 5H ladder for at least 3 of those H's. And it came from a gentleman named Luis Montoya, who was then the president of PepsiCo Latin America, and used the terms head, heart, and hands in a speech that he gave to young leaders. And over 2 decades or so, that really stuck with me. And I built upon it, I expanded it, I strengthened it, and I added the H's of humility and humanity. And that culminated in the 5H ladder for purpose-based leadership. Thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you.